Well, good evening, everybody. It's Chris here from the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta. And we have an awesome guest tonight. It's my friend Tanner. Tanner used to join me at Alberta Prosperity Project events, traveling across the province and explaining to people why Alberta needs to be independent. Also speaking about things like the Alberta Pension Plan, economic stuff. He's a young economist and a very, very bright guy. The reason I decided to do this podcast tonight is because recently I've been posting on X a little bit, some things about Alberta independence. One of the things I posted was this. I said, Alberta will have an Alberta pension plan managed by Albertans and accountable to Albertans. I have no interest in an Ottawa that really doesn't give a shit about Alberta managing our pension plan. How's that CPP federal asset doing anyhow? And it actually got some traction. I don't have a big presence on X, but this one hit 11,000 views and there's a lot of comments. And what I noticed in the comments was most of them are negative. And it's not because an Alberta pension plan is a negative thing. It's because it seems to me as though people really don't know what they're talking about. They're making emotional decisions about something that will actually affect their retirement and their futures. And this goes with Alberta independence as well. Another thing I saw on X was somebody talking about a post where we said something along the lines of Alberta drives the Canadian economy and it kind of carries the country on its back. And someone said, well, Ontario has a larger GDP and they have more people and blah, blah. And I started digging into this and I realized that not only does Alberta carry the province or the country on its back economically, there's something that people fail to realize when the term GDP is thrown around. And Tanner and I are going to discuss that. I also wrote a blog about this today with the help of my friend Grok about these things. And you can find that at whistlestoptruckstop.ca under the blog section. If you have any interest in this stuff at all, which you should because it affects your future, please read that. And if there's something you think I got wrong, send me a message and let me know, and I'll dig into it because we need to get these things right. It's really, really important that we get these things right and we know what we're talking about. We know what we're looking at when it comes time to make decisions about things like this. So that's why Tanner is joining me tonight, because he is way smarter than me on this stuff. And we're going to do our absolute best to try and clear the air, make it clear as mud, and answer all of your questions on everything economics when it comes to Alberta Pension Plan, Alberta independence, and the comparison between Alberta and other provinces. So thank you very much, Tanner, for joining me tonight on kind of short notice. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you. As you did a Christmas podcast with Sean Newman again, I see.
It's become a tradition, and it's quite a lot of fun. It's always great to be interviewed by Sean, and the Christmas episodes are always a favorite. So, and I know that you had been interviewed by him like a week before that. So we had just seen each other too.
Yep. No, it's good. It's good to catch up. You live a little ways away from me. It's not the shortest of drives, but it's nice when we can have a visit. So tonight we're going to visit on the podcast, and we're going to talk about some of these things. You read my blog. You kind of know where I'm coming from. I'm going to put this X post up on the screen, and I'm not going to go through all the comments for everyone, but I just want people to get an idea of what we're looking at here. So this is the post that I put on X where I was talking about Alberta Pension Plan, how we're going to have an Alberta Pension Plan. It's going to be managed by Albertans. It's going to be accountable to us because that's the best way. That's the best way to manage it ourselves, right? Because it's us that's going to deal with it. And the response was immediate, and there was a lot of negative responses. But as I go through them, I realize that people are negative about this because they have an emotional attachment to the status quo, and they don't really know what the future could hold if we take control of this pension plan for ourselves. And it's the same conversation with Alberta independence. So I'm just going to zip through these, folks. Just look at this. Look at these comments. People are really interested in this. And yeah, most of these comments are negative, but that means that people actually, they care enough to post. So if that's the case, if people care, they probably want some information. So that's what we're going to do today. What do you think, Tanner? Did you get a chance to see any of these comments yet?
I haven't seen any of the comments, but what you're talking about checks out when I look at, what we've been doing over the last, year or 2 years sort of thing, right? One of the most popular critiques of Alberta independence or things surrounding that nature, it's not an economic critique. It's a critique from fear. You're right. Or it's a critique from a mistaken, unification with Canada regarding the pension plan. When people criticize it, it is often from that base misunderstanding or a base misunderstanding, no understanding at all for that matter, of one, the way the Canadian pension plan works, and two, the way that an Alberta pension plan would work. So it's almost an argument from ignorance. And, on one hand, I don't blame people for being frightened. You put a lot of money into that pension. You hope that it's going to come back to you. But on the other hand, we all have an obligation to, search for what's true and do the hard work of investigation ourselves so we don't spew nonsense. So I haven't read the comments, but what you say checks out with what I've experienced.
And it gives me hope, because at the very least, these are people that are aware enough and engaged enough that they'll take time to leave a negative comment. Yeah. And if they take time to do that, maybe they'll take time to actually learn a bit about it and with an open mind. Now, one of the most common comments I got on here was something along the lines of this. This one's kind of animated, so I'll use it. It says, from certified EV rage counselor, says, keep your filthy hashtag hands off my CPP. So this person is, they're basically saying, hey, don't touch my CPP because I believe it's safer and better where it is now than where Alberta wants it to be. How would you respond to that one?
Well, I would actually start by responding, or I would start my response with a question, which is, what exactly do you mean hands off my CPP? You're right. Insinuated in that hashtag is the idea that if Alberta had its own pension plan, it would be managed by Smith and her cabinet and the UCP. And that concern, that argument has absolutely no basis in reality whatsoever. The hashtag, it's a good hashtag if you're trying to stay in the CPP. It's very catchy. If you're on the left, or if you completely reject an Alberta pension plan, but it has no real basis in reality whatsoever. Like, you and I together are actively pushing for an Alberta pension plan that is completely separate government, more so than the Canadian pension plan is right now. Because, of course, with the Canadian pension plan, its managers are ultimately appointed by the federal finance minister in Ottawa. So you have government interference there as it is. We even have on record, right, Trudeau and other cabinet members or former cabinet members like Freeland gathering pension leaders together and telling, for example, the Canadian pension plan bosses to invest more in Canadian infrastructure to try and pump the economy. So you have government interference as it stands, or at least attempted government interference in the Canadian pension plan. The hashtag hands off my CPP is just a political catchphrase. It has no grounding in reality whatsoever. And we have no desire to have the government manage our pensions. On the contrary.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is true, I believe, that either federal parliament or the Alberta legislature, they could make law that influences or impacts the way in which the pension plan is managed. That's something they can do. However,
go
ahead.
Go back to that federal finance minister appointing and so on the managers at the Canadian pension plan. So, of course, if you're, Krista Freeland or whatever finance minister you want, you have an agenda, and that agenda extends beyond maximizing profit, maximizing returns on the pension, right? You have a social agenda. You have an agenda that lines up with the party that you are
agenda,
exactly a political agenda that you're working for. And so you're going to do everything you can to make sure that agenda is achieved. Look at the Canadian pension plan. One of the things that we're seeing is, after all of this time of having, managers and so on be appointed by finance ministers who don't have the same values that you and I might have, The Canadian Pension Plan is now actively investing in no carbon investments and total green energy, and it's going to get out of oil investments as quick as it possibly can, and so on and so on. That might not be a profit maximizing idea, it might be something totally different, like a social responsibility that the CPP thinks that it has, because it's been, managed by individuals who were appointed by politicians who have that idea. But the point is, you have a political agenda inserted into that institution to try and push forward what lots of government wants to get done.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this a little later too. Political agendas also influence things like, talking about GDP or using irrelevant GDP numbers kind of as lipstick on a pig, i.e. lipstick on the managed decline of Canada. But we'll get into that a little later. So I want to point out, there's always going to be a government or an administration that is responsible for making sure that the pension plan is doing what it's supposed to be, whether it's Alberta or Canada. My opinion is, if I'm going to have a government responsible for administering how the pension plan functions, or who's appointed, who's managing, whatever, I want my vote to count. I want to be able to hold the government accountable if they do it wrong. Right now, if the federal government isn't making sure that Canada Pension Plan is doing what I want it to be doing, then I want to be able to vote and have my vote count. But we can't do that in Western Canada. We know that as Western Canadians, the entire western part of Canada could vote one way. Ontario and Quebec could vote another way, and they'll win every single time. So the key here is we need to be able to be sovereign in the decision making as to who does these things, whether it's federal or provincial. And in Alberta's case, the only way we can have real control is if we have it managed provincially, which is why we should take control of those 5 things.
Yeah, the idea is, you're right. You have, a greater ability to exert influence over policy and so on when the government that is representing you is closer to home. It is much easier to keep tabs on an Alberta government than it is on an Ottawa government. And even if you can keep tabs on an Ottawa government, you're right. They don't care what we think of them because they know how we're going to vote. And it's not like we're a battleground, like we're a battleground province. And so their intent and their focus is not here, but it's rather in the east, where you do have swing provinces, or you do have swing jurisdictions that determine how an election is either won or lost. When it comes to an Alberta pension, ideally, right, we want government removed totally from the process as much as possible. Like in an ideal world, there's no government involvement. And the reason ultimately is because government doesn't exist to maximize. And with a pension, we want that. Right? It sounds like a evil thing to hear profit maximization. We've been brainwashed to believe that anytime you hear the word profit and maximization together, you are dealing with a robber baron or some industrialist capitalist who hates the working man and wants to cover the air with black smoke from a factory. But that isn't necessarily the case, right? What instead we want is our pension fund to profit maximize so that we can generate as much return as possible for those individuals who actually invest, in the pension. I want as much money as possible with my investment. Not like I invest to make just a little bit of money, hopefully. I'm satisfied with the least. No, I want the most. I want to get the most for my dollar. But that isn't government's well, it's actually not even their responsibility, but it's also not their agenda. Their agenda is to win power. And so they do different things from day to day to ensure that they win power in the next election. That doesn't generate a lot of stability for a pension. That doesn't generate a lot of stability for investments. And so it means those institutions that are managed by government are not able to function as effectively because they're no longer profit maximizing. So you're right. What we want is a system where we get government as much out of that process as possible so that we are able to build up a stable, steady, profit maximizing machine that guarantees the highest returns possible for we Albertans and ensures that those returns are available to us when we retire. That's really the argument, right? That's the foundation of the entire project. So going back to your earlier comment, the idea that, we want government to grab, the pension and put their hands on that is such nonsense. It has no basis whatsoever in reality or in argument.
You mentioned maximizing profit.
Yeah.
Another frequent comment in here is that the CPP is one of the best performing pension plans in the world. It performs fantastic. It's great. But then I see reports coming out of places like the Fraser Institute that estimate over a lifetime contribution into CPP, your actual return on investment is like 2% or something.
Yeah.
Which one is true? Because they both can't be true.
This is probably in my opinion, this is probably the strongest argument against staying in the Canadian Pension Plan. And it's also the argument that people understand the least. So the CPP, of course, takes your money. I'm oversimplifying, but it takes your money. You pay them, every month with your income tax, your CPP tax, I suppose. You give them money, and lots of that money is shoveled out to seniors who are collecting on their Canadian Pension Plan. But the little bit that's left over is invested, and it's invested by the Canadian Pension Plan Board, and those investments are piling up in a big asset pile. So far, so good. Not too bad. Now, we often hear, like you mentioned, a lot of politicians and bureaucrats who talk about these marvelous returns that the CPP is generating. Over a 10-year period, the CPP averages a 10% rate of return, or whatever it might be. It's somewhere around there, 9.5%, whatever it is. According to those numbers, the return is, over 10 years, if the numbers are correct, 10% annual or average rates of return is pretty solid. Okay, great. So then the argument goes, well, why on earth then would we as Albertans want to leave that stability, that security, excess of money? If the pension's performing so marvelously, what would possess us to say we want our own pension instead? This is now where the argument comes to a summit. Because even though the Canadian Pension Plan might be earning 10% rates of return on its investment, let's suppose that it is for sake of argument, that return on that investment or those investments has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on the amount of return that you and I, as individual Canadians, are going to make on our CPP contributions. So we'll repeat it to say it slowly. What the CPP makes on its investments is not correlated to what you and I make on our contributions. You and I, over the course of our working life, send money to the CPP, do it month after month after month. And then when we decide to pull our pension, right, whether it's 65 or 67 or 70, whatever it is, we receive our investment, supposedly, back. But when you look at how the amount of money that we receive is calculated, you see that it has nothing to do with how well the CPP did or didn't do. What it has to do with instead is how long did we work, how much money did we make while working, and what age did we retire at? How long did we work? How much money did I make while working? And at what age did I retire? Those three factors contribute to the calculation that determines how much money is going to go into your bank account and mine. And when the math is complete, Fraser Institute is correct, we earn about a 2.5% to 4%-ish rate of return over our lifetime contributions to the CPP. And the younger you are, the lower that number is. So my rates will not be as great as, my dad's rates. And my children's rates, if nothing changes, won't be as great as my rates, and so on and so on. So the return really is anemic as far as I'm concerned. It's abysmal. It's not like we're earning those 10% rates of return that we've been told by the media and by commentators online. It's more like that 2.5% rate of return. Very, very, well, anemic is the word, right? It's a shallow rate of return.
So that it's a talking point headline, not necessarily a fact that you should be making a decision on.
That's right. Precisely. The CPP could generate 100% rate of return 1 year. It wouldn't change how much the seniors are making. It would stay the exact same. And that's the vice versa is true as well. Like, the CPP could lose 100% 1 year. It wouldn't change how much they're making because their calculations that determine their returns, how much money goes into their bank every month, is not correlated to the CPP's performance. So, really, like that argument, this argument that you're hearing, it's the same thing as saying, well, my insurance company's making a lot of money, so why would I want to leave them? It's like, well, because my rates are terrible. That's the argument. No one would ever say, my auto insurance company is just rolling in it, so I'm never going to leave them. It's like, no, you look at your own returns, and then you decide what to do from there.
When people are talking about, I'm just looking at the same comment, when people are talking about the rate of return, and this person says, yeah, let's trade a world-renowned pension plan that makes double what AIMCO makes.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about that? People are assuming that an Alberta pension plan would perform similar to what AIMCO does or has.
Well, firstly, again, it's that argument is structured on a presupposition that we want AIMCO to manage the pension fund. There is a lot of misunderstanding, right, with the Alberta Pension Plan argument as a whole. One of which being the idea that we think AIMCO as it is right now ought to manage the fund. And the answer is no. AIMCO has a lot of political involvement, way too much political involvement. And AIMCO does not have the mandate to profit maximize, actually. It doesn't have that mandate at all. It has a lot of strings attached to its investment regulations that handcuff it and do not allow it to invest perhaps as the managers there would like to invest. Now, it's true that with the AIMCO numbers as they are, even if it was managing an Alberta pension plan, it would perform, or AIMCO is performing right now, successfully enough that it could manage an Alberta pension plan and not go bankrupt. That's true. But again, we don't want AIMCO as it stands to manage it because it's too controlled by government. What we want instead is an independent institution that is free of government, totally free of government, managing our fund with one mandate: to profit maximize. That's it. Make as much money as possible while mitigating risk, and make sure that money is there for us when we retire. So, the comments that you've mentioned so far, they're good comments, but they just highlight the same problem over and over and over again. And it's people arguing from a position of no real knowledge. They have fabricated these ideas of what an Alberta pension plan would be in their brain, and the fabrication does not correspond to what we who are advocating for a pension plan are actually saying. And so really, right, all of these arguments are what are called straw men when you look at it logically or philosophically or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. A straw man is you have an opinion and you decide to construct your opponent's opinion, or you misrepresent your opponent's opinion. So you build up this straw man, and then with all of your logic, you whack that straw man and you take him out with all of your expertise in debate. And you win the argument. But the problem is that straw man that you've constructed, that isn't our argument at all. So too here with AIMCO and so on.
Talking about AIMCO, I do want to point out that the Smith administration actually did identify that AIMCO was performing fairly poorly. She fired the entire board. She put the Minister of Finance as the administrator for a time, and then they replaced the board and hired Stephen Harper as the chair. So, the government did take steps to fix what's been going wrong with AIMCO. So maybe people, they have this idea that I think they just hate the UCP. So anything they touch is going to be bad. But it's this current UCP administration that's actually taking steps to fix some of the problems that they want to fix in the first place. So I hope that people will at least be able to see that.
Right. And I'm looking into the long term as well. It might be true that you have a government by miracle that, while in power, really does want to appoint a board, let's say to AIMCO, that profit maximizes. And then once the government has done so, they step back completely. Don't touch it at all. Right. That is so rare. It is a miracle. But anyway, you might have that for a term. But when you look long term, we know that there are going to be other governments in power. And, heaven forbid, if a Rachel Notley repeat happened, we want to shield that institution so that it isn't subject to a new premier or a new cabinet that has no desire whatsoever to profit maximize, but instead wants to advance a social agenda, or completely kill the oil and gas industry, or, do who knows what else. So that's where I'm coming from it. I'm looking at a longer term and saying, we know that there's going to be fluctuation in the political market. How can we stabilize the investing market, AIMCO or whatever other institution it is, so that it isn't disturbed that much at all by a change in the political guard?
That's really interesting. I did hear rumors of some things being legislated that would require a referendum to change them. Maybe this is one of those things that's right. Being considered.
Sure.
Who knows? But the key is, I think what you're saying, Tanner, is that the people that are saying UCP hands off my pension, we actually agree with them.
That's the argument.
Government hands off our pension.
Yeah, that's right. We agree. Yeah. Wholeheartedly. Okay. Hands off our pension. That's true. But of course, they're insinuating that it means no APP. We are insinuating it means APP. So the conclusion is different. The presupposition is the same. Don't touch my pension, because I don't like when government touches really money at all, for that matter, let alone my investment. But my conclusion is, therefore, let's have a firewall. Let's have an APP. And their conclusion is, let's stay in the CPP, which I think is mistaken.
So we both kind of want to be at the same destination. And I mean both sides of the argument. We both want good pensions when we retire, and we both want government out of it. So now the debate isn't what we want; it's how we're going to get there. And I think if people take the time to go to the, even the Alberta First Pension website, look at some of the videos that were done, learn the information, I think they'll find that we really are aligned on these things, and we should be working together towards it.
Yeah, we have a marvelous opportunity here to increase our quality of life and to increase the stability of seniors in retirement. So we should work as hard as we can to see that objective achieved. And we're confident and convinced one of the ways to do so is by leaving the CPP and starting our own Alberta Pension Plan. It's very exciting.
There was another comment here that I wanted to touch on quickly. The idea was, where is it here? The idea was, no, it's not there. I'll find it. First, I'm gonna put this question up. Sure. This isn't specifically about an Alberta Pension Plan, but we get asked this question all the time. The question is about old age security and what's GIS, guaranteed income supplement.
Yeah.
Our federal programs, not provincial. How will seniors be supported financially, legally, sustainably, and without interruption? Tanner, I'm going to let you comment on that while I find this comment.
Sure. So that's a very good question too, because of course it relates to stability. One of the hallmarks of a successful transition to an independent Alberta is stability. Like the last thing that the province wants to do, if it wants to do this job right, is make it tumultuous. Right, the markets and economists and anything to do with finances just hates a whole bunch of uncertainty. We like it when we know what's going to happen, or at least we think we think we know what's going to happen next. And so, with regards to OAS and GIS and so on, it would be, in my opinion, unethical to just up and cut those individuals who are receiving it off, right? Because they are, of course, relying on that to live. And so the actual transition itself, though, would be rather simple. I think people very often forget that with independence, it's not as though Alberta votes one day. If the vote is successful, it leaves the next day. It doesn't work like that. Rather, the vote is successful, and then you negotiate. And you negotiate for, a good period of time so as to iron out all of those details, including with OAS and GIS, or OAS and GIS and CPP and so on and so on and so on. So basically the answer is, it's a little vague, but the truth is all of that has to be negotiated in that interim period before Alberta actually becomes independent. So that when, independent Alberta day one officially begins, that transition will be seamless. The only difference you would see, all else equal, is a different name on the top of the check that you receive.
I'll go out on a limb here and say if I ever had anything to do with any of these negotiations, those things, of course, would be negotiated so that the recipients of those things weren't harmed. I mean,
No.
nobody wants to take anything away from seniors or retirees or anything like that. So it would be Alberta would have a moral obligation to make sure that those people weren't left behind, period.
Yeah.
And whether it worked out that if it was something that was paid into, like CPP, I mean, that's transferable, it's portable, you get it no matter what, it's yours. Old age security, we would have to have something to replace it. So at no time ever has anybody in the Alberta Prosperity Project or an advocate for Alberta independence said that we want to get rid of those programs. No, that's something that we would take over and manage ourselves. And we could do it if we weren't sending $27 billion to Ottawa, for which we don't get anything back. There'd be a lot of money to do that.
A lot more, that's for sure.
And I remembered what the comment was. I still can't find it, but it was something along the lines of Alberta can't afford an Alberta pension plan because they would have to pay to get money out of the pension fund. But the chief actuary, the numbers in the LifeWorks report suggest that Alberta's share of the pension fund is actually quite significant.
Yeah, I don't really understand that argument at all, to be honest. The idea that we'd have to pay to get, our money out of the fund. No, that doesn't work like that. And especially with the negotiated rules for a province leaving the pension plan, which it has every legal ability to do according to the Canadian Pension Plan documents. There's the Robarts interpretation, and there is a list of rules that have to be followed if a province wants to leave the CPP. One of those rules being it has to set up a pension that's almost identical to the CPP so that those seniors who are collecting now or will be collecting in the future aren't shortchanged. And there is absolutely nothing in there whatsoever about a province having to pay to, be paid out its portion of the CPP that is theirs. And not only so, like you mentioned, but Alberta has accumulated a substantial surplus when it comes to the Canadian Pension Plan. It is not as though we pay, $3 billion a year and then receive back $6 billion, right? Instead, we pay $9 billion into the pension-ish every year and receive back about 6 or, 6 and a little bit of change. The numbers fluctuate from year to year. But the point being, we have an ample surplus built up into the CPP after decades and decades of doing this, just in the principle, let alone with the actual investment income that we will have accrued in the province. So no, that argument doesn't really hold much weight at all. It doesn't hold any weight at all, actually.
Now, it is true that it would cost a lot of money to set up a pension plan. I mean, there's administration stuff. There's initial things. Yeah. And I've heard estimates in the range of $1 billion, which sounds like a lot until you realize that our share, as reported in the LifeWorks report, based on the calculations in the legislation, it's like $340 billion. Yeah. Now, $340 billion is just about half of the fund, I think, isn't it? I can't remember what's the fund? 780 billion, I think, is the fund. Something like that.
It's up there. It's between 7 and 8. I haven't checked in the last month, kind of thing, but it's up there.
So if you look at the numbers, and you say, okay, Alberta is entitled to $340 billion of that, but their population's only 15% of the country. Why do they get almost 50% of the fund, having only 15% of the people? And my question is, if Alberta's portion is almost 50%, and the money that would be left over isn't enough to cover what the rest of the country needs, where is the money? Where's the money that was contributed by other provinces that should be able to sustain those places? It's not there.
That's a good question. Yeah, the way the CPP works is, the truth is the CPP is much more a social insurance program than it is a pension plan. So you think of just an insurance plan in general, which works like this. You pay into the plan, and you do so with the understanding that if the thing which you are being insured for happens, the insurance company will pay you out so that you're covered. With the CPP, you are paying into an insurance plan that will pay you out in case what happens to you? Well, in case you get old. That's the insurance. The CPP says we will give you insurance that will be paid out to you if you reach, age X, 65 or 67 or 70, whatever number there that you choose. That is the insurance plan. And so with regards to where is the money going and so on, well, obviously those provinces that have populations that are older, those provinces that have populations that don't work as much or don't earn as much money will see themselves earning a lot more from the CPP than what they pay into it year after year after year. It's true, like this happens in some of the Atlantic provinces. It happens in some of the bigger provinces. It doesn't happen in Alberta, again, because of our demographic, because of our incomes, because we're a younger population compared to the average, the national average, and so on. So when you look at the way that the CPP is divvied out, then you start to see exactly where money is going and why Alberta's share of the CPP is so large. It's so large in part because we're a younger population. We work a lot compared to others, and we earn a pretty good chunk of change compared to other provinces in the country. It means our contributions are higher relative to others, and we don't take as much out because we're younger. So a lot of factors combine into this what would you call it? Not idea. It's a reality of an unfunded liability. And a lot of economists debate and discuss and have all sorts of spirited conversations about the matter.
And at the root of the opposition to an Alberta pension plan from people in other provinces, perhaps provinces that contribute less than they receive, they have this feeling of entitlement to somebody else's money. They have a feeling that they're entitled to what Albertans produce, that they should, for some reason, receive part of that. And I just got to remind people, when you look at what's deducted off your paycheck for CPP, say it's $200 on your check or whatever, your employer also matches that. So it's not just the $200, it's another $200 that comes out of your provincial economy, because that $200 is made up in the price of goods and services sold by that employer. So it's not money that just comes from nowhere. It comes from somewhere, and it comes from you folks.
Exactly. Yeah, like it costs money. It's not like this isn't a free social program. There are no free social programs. There is no free lunch. There's a Friedman quote. It's very famous. No such thing as a free lunch. Same thing here. No such thing as a free Canadian pension plan. It does cost, and it costs a lot. And when you look at the CPP's performance for you as an individual, so that between 2.5% and 4%, compared to the performance of even a moderately performing mutual fund, right? If you had taken that money that was sent to the CPP and had instead privately invested it, your results would be far superior, like unbelievably superior compared to what the CPP produced. And even if you passed, right, with a private pension, your spouse would still receive the benefit, which it's not quite the case with the CPP, right? There are deductions that occur when your spouse passes away. And when you both pass away, it's not as though your children inherit some, pile of cash. No, it's that the whole process repeats, because again, the CPP is much more accurately compared to a social insurance program than it is to a pension plan. It should be called the Canadian Social Insurance Program, right? That's what it should be called. Or Canadian Old Age Insurance Program. It shouldn't be called the Canadian Pension Plan. There's nothing really that pension-y about it.
So it is yours, but not really. It's only yours so long as the government allows it to be yours. You might contribute, I don't know, you might contribute $250,000 over your lifetime or something like that with your employer, but you might only get 50 or 60,000 before you pass away, and then the rest is not yours. It's not handed down to your kids. It's not an asset. It just is back to the government. So here's a question. Good question from Shelley. Won't we receive both CPP and APP?
That's a good question. The answer is no, not quite. Suppose that we had an Alberta pension plan. The way that the transition process would work is you have your CPP right now, nothing changes. Then Alberta announces its intention to create an Alberta pension plan. And during that period, the necessary infrastructure, that interim period between actually having the plan and the announcement of the creation of it, you have an interim period in which, all of the necessary infrastructure is constructed. You have all of the, hopefully, all of the, ins and outs and the little intricacies of the plan checked off and figured out. And then when the official start date of the APP, the Alberta Pension Plan, begins, for individuals who are submitting contributions to the pension plan, they'll just stop submitting to Ottawa and they'll start submitting to Alberta. So a very minor change there. Only thing that's different, again, is the name on the top of the submission. And for individuals who are receiving Canadian Pension Plan, they will start receiving their payouts from an APP. Again, only thing that's different, all else equal, is the name at the top of the check. Now, you might see as a senior an increase in the amount of money that you're receiving, depending on what policy is adopted. That's fair. It can't be less. Otherwise, the APP would not be allowed to start at all, according to the Canadian law. But you could see an increase. But other than that, really very little changes. Again, what we want is the most smooth and non-turbulent process as possible. We want it to be just like glass, right? The transition has to be so seamless that if you didn't know anything was happening at all, you wouldn't even recognize a change. Unless your payouts went up, then you might notice.
Yeah, and I'm sure that people would notice that change. But the key is that nobody who's advocating for an independent Alberta or an Alberta pension plan wants anybody to be left behind. That is absolutely paramount. There's a couple more questions here. This is an interesting one from Sandy. Sandy asked, what about the rumors that the PM is planning on using our CPP for guarantees in the United Arab Emirates?
That's a good question. Well, officially, I'll answer the question in two parts. First, officially, the CPP and its assets are supposedly untouchable by the government, by the federal government, right? The official picture is you have the CPP's assets here, and you have the government's general budget and monies over there. They're supposed to be two separate vaults, basically, so that the federal government can't plunge its hands into that Canadian Pension Plan asset pile and use it for their own agenda. That's the official ruling. But you read the budget, right? We all read the budget a couple months ago.
That.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And I'm being facetious. Anyways, you read the budget. And you notice in a very small little footnote after a balance sheet has just been provided, there's a little footnote that talks about the asset side of the balance sheet, right? You have assets and liabilities. And what that footnote tells you is that the Canadian Pension Plan's asset is used as part of the government's asset and liability balance sheet. So even though officially, the Canadian Pension Plan's assets and federal government's budget are supposed to be totally separate, right? Government's not supposed to touch the Canadian Pension Plan. We see that in the budget, the federal government has indeed included the Canadian Pension Plan asset pile, whatever it is, between 7 and 800 billion, into its calculations. And more than that, even though they include the CPP's asset in their balance sheet, the government does not include the associated CPP liabilities in the federal budget. So they play a lot of accounting trickery to try and paint a rosier picture to the Canadian public than what the true books might actually show. So with regards then to that rumor about, the Prime Minister using that pile, Well, it seems like the government, in a sense, is already using the asset pile, right? They're using it to boost up their books and to make the Canadian financial position appear superior to what it actually is. How far can they go with that? That's a political question, and it probably depends on the politician and just how how brash they're willing to be.
That's a perfect segue into what I'm going to call Chapter 2, Lipstick on a Pig. But there's one more question from Mary, and the question is for you, Tanner. Would you, Tanner, take over the CPP portfolio in an independent Alberta?
That's a very humbling question. Absolutely not. Those individuals who work in the investing markets have models and statistics and regressions that are so complicated and brilliant that I wouldn't dare even think about doing something like that. I applaud those who have the ability to read all of those charts and study the markets in a very intricate and dedicated way. So I'd love to ensure that board isn't compromised by government. That's true. But as for the actual investing, I'll leave it to a true blue expert. Most certainly not me.
I have a feeling that in the coming years, those experts are going to have their job will be more managing the AI system that's doing that.
Probably true.
Hands-on.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Wouldn't surprise me at all either. Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the next section of this, and it's a perfect time to do it. You talked about making something look good for political purpose. Now, one of the things that's been tossed around in the comments regarding Alberta independence is Alberta carries the country financially on its back. And then the responses we get are things like, no, Alberta's GDP is only 15%. Ontario's is 35 or 36% or whatever. So Ontario actually carries the country's economy. Now, I started digging into this and I wrote that blog about it. And what I found, Tanner, was that Alberta, I think I can't remember what the number was, 44 or 48% of Alberta's GDP is made up from direct value contributing things that we can export, things that we can sell, things that have tangible value, produced value. Ontario, on the other hand, almost the majority of their GDP figures are made up of things like public education, healthcare, government services, bureaucracy, real estate, leasing, those types of things. Things that aren't actually created value, but they cost the value that's been created. So what I determined was, while Ontario has a larger GDP, there's so much, I don't know if it's the right word, but parasitic draw on the value created that they're really not driving the economy as much as some people would like us to believe. Am I kind of getting it closer?
Yeah, you're thinking like an economist, hey? It's good.
I'm trying.
You're right. What's a good example? Look at job creation. So every politician wants job creation, right? Lots of jobs, lots of jobs, lots of jobs. That's the idea. But an economist says not so fast, right? If I wanted to create lots of jobs, here's what I'd do. I'd go to the construction site, right? And I would hand every construction worker a spoon and I'd say, get digging. And then I'd hand them, a butter knife, and I'd say, now get leveling, right? As you make the concrete pad or whatever it is. I'd create a lot of jobs very quickly, right? Thousands of jobs, as a matter of fact, because you need thousands of spoons. That isn't ideal. What I want instead, right, as an economist, is to create valuable jobs that enable society to advance as fast and as ethically and as properly as possible. So instead of giving thousands of workers spoons to go and level off a pad to build a warehouse or something, what I ought to do is give one man a bulldozer and let him do all that work, and then give a second man a grader, and he can finalize all of that construction work so that the warehouse can be built on top of a concrete pad. So too here with GDP and Alberta and Ontario. The problem with GDP is it doesn't paint a very clean picture, does it? It doesn't show all of the intricacies
No, it doesn't.
we're interested in. So with regards to Alberta, GDP produces, or we're producing a lot, correct? And we're producing goods and services that add value to the world. We like that a lot. Oil and gas, of course, is the example. And yeah, it's our prime export by a lot. Like, an overwhelming majority of our export is heavy oil, heavy sour, right? Goes down south. Almost all of it goes down south to the States. Ontario is different. Yeah, they have a bigger GDP on the whole because they're so much bigger population-wise than Alberta. But not only so, their main drivers, or their big drivers in the economy, first have to take value and first have to take resource away from someone in order to, quote unquote, produce value. So when you're digging for oil, like in the sands, when you're drilling for oil, you're not taking value away from anybody when you do so, right? You are actually discovering new value by drilling for oil. No one is forced to pay you for it, right? They do so out of their own volition because they want that oil. But when it comes to public services, government and so on, like it is in Ontario, those bureaucrats first force the Canadian to pay for their services, and then the bureaucrats will provide a service which really isn't a service at all, right? If it is a service, it's poorly managed, very inefficient, and the quality is always wanting. So yes, there is a vast gap there that is not captured by just looking at the GDP, right? If Alberta produced $1 of GDP and Ontario produced $1 of GDP every year, you'd say they're both equal, right? Nothing's different. But when you zoom in on each province, you would see that Alberta produces a GDP of $1 with a resource primarily that adds value, oil. Ontario, in order to produce that dollar, first has to take the dollar from somebody else or close to it so that they can pay the bureaucrats and the public workers and the governmental institutions to hand out that low quality service to society. I thought that was the best part of your blog. I really did. It highlighted that point very efficiently and effectively.
Well, thank you. It also made me think about when Justin Trudeau was our prime minister, we could feel that our economy was performing poorly.
Yeah.
That things were not great. Inflation was kind of out of control. Groceries are expensive. Everything's expensive. And yet the government was saying our GDP is growing, where things are great. Things are great. And I'm thinking, how in the world could these numbers be correct? And then it occurred to me, actually just today, as I was going through this, we brought in record numbers of immigrants, a portion of who received entitlements to be in Canada for interesting things. Like Canada has a LGBTQ refugee program. So if you're being persecuted for your sexual ideology in another country, you can come to Canada and Canada will pay your living expenses for X amount of time. Well, those living expenses that Canada pays people that come here from other places are actually calculated as part of our GDP. So is the extra healthcare that's needed. So is the extra education and teachers. All of those things that are needed to provide services to people who are unable or unwilling to create value for the country are calculated in our GDP. And then I was like, aha, that's how they did it. They hired a whole bunch of bureaucrats. They brought in a whole bunch of people and they calculated that as economic activity. But it was actually, it was a complete hoodwink to the Canadian people. And it's why we saw numbers that didn't reflect what we were feeling.
Right. And the same is true even in another factor that you could look at, of course, is inflation. So over the last 5 years, right, the government gave out a whole bunch of money. Now, you and I know the helicopter money that was handed out, right? The money, the bills that were dropped from the sky, and every family got so-and-so X thousands of dollars every month to help stimulate the economy and help keep families afloat. What we didn't see as much was the true blue inflation, the true blue money printing that happened in the background, right? Where you had government printing like countless millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to give to the big investors, right, in the shadows, so that they could use that money to try and pump the Canadian economy, invest in the economy, and we'll see if it picks itself back up, right? Because if you're an investor and you get, let's say, $100 million from government, right? You don't need a bicycle. You don't have to go buy more groceries. You're already doing fine. You don't need a new barbecue. You have all of those things. You live in a mansion. So instead, you take that money and you go to the stock market and you start playing. Or you go to the housing market and you start buying up, right? You start moving in these various asset areas in the economy, in the Canadian economy. And by doing so, by injecting more and more and more money into those asset markets, housing's a great example, right? You drive the cost of housing up. Everyone says, wow, it's booming right now. Look at all of these places that are being bought up. Surely I should put my house on the market too, and I should do so for a lot of money. I'll try and make some. And the guy buys it, you go, great. And that tells another person to do the same thing. And the market continues to rise higher and higher and higher. And not only so, but then you have entrepreneurs who are receiving big money from government. And they go, that's fantastic. I'm going to start expanding. I'll build a new warehouse. I'll hire a bunch of workers. And the business will continue to boom. That's the idea. Bubble. Yeah, we call it malinvestment in economics. And the idea is all of that growth is situated on a lie. It's situated on a false idea of just how marvelously the economy is performing, when in fact it isn't performing that wonderfully at all. It's just that government gave a whole lot of handouts to a whole lot of people. Of course, you can't do this forever. And so eventually one person notices, and then two, and then 4, and 16, and so on and so on. And the market stalls, and then it collapses. And so we're kind of in that interim, we're right at a fulcrum right now. We're waiting to see what's happening. Like, we know surely the economy is in a recession, right? If this isn't a recession, I don't know what is. You have so many people who are struggling to find jobs, let alone to then make all of their ends meet when you look at the price of everything. And still yet we're told the economy is doing not bad. No, it isn't, right? The economy is in a bad position right now. And the numbers might not say that, but again, they don't paint the whole picture. You're right to bring up that point about how easy it is to skew all of these facts and figures so that you paint a rosier picture of the economy than what it actually is.
We're seeing that in Ontario right now because Ontario has the highest percentage of bureaucrats and service-related employed people in the country. So what happened is everybody wanted to live in that hub. Yeah. And as they moved there, the house prices went up because there was more demand and less supply. And the house prices went up. So then the bureaucrats said, well, we need raises. And they gave themselves raises. And the politicians give themselves raises. And then they can buy the houses and pay more money. And it just snowballs. But the people that are buying those houses are their value that's included in the economy is from us. Yeah. I think the number is like 1 in 10 Canadians is employed by government or some type of bureaucracy. So 1 in 10 Canadians produces no value. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Is a parasitic draw on the original value created by someone in, say, a resource-based industry or creating goods or something like that. And that's scary. And now Ontario they're going to start seeing those results. And even worse, when Alberta becomes independent and the Canadian dollar likely takes a bit of a tumble, because even though we're only 15% of GDP, it's a much stronger 15% than what Ontario's 36% is. I think it's going to be a disaster, an absolute disaster.
Wouldn't doubt it for a second. It's a lot of uncertainty that's introduced, especially when you're right. You consider the steady rock economically that Alberta has been for Canada, right? Even when Alberta was down, or when the rest of the country was down, you could depend on Alberta to continue producing. It's just part of the nature of the people of Alberta and of the geography and of the political structure of the province and of the attitudes of the people in the province and the entrepreneurship and all of those things, right? Alberta has been a province for the last, how many decades, where those in any corner of the country is able to say, or are able to say, that province will continue to produce. It's just the way Alberta is. So economically, we punch above our weight when you compare ourselves to the rest of the provinces in Canada. There really isn't much of a comparison at all, actually. And it's like, yeah, in part, of course, we were blessed with resource here. We have excellent farmland. Right. We have excellent mineral deposits, right? Like when you look at Alberta's proven reserves of oil. We are top 3, top 4 in the world, just Alberta. And without Alberta, Canada's oil reserve levels drop like dramatically, not just by a not just by a level or two, but by tens or 20s of levels, lots and lots. So we have all of that. Yeah, it's a wonderful blessing. And we're working hard to try and capture as much of it as possible. But at the same time, at the same time, we're being actively stifled and are unable to do so because of heavy restriction, red tape, government policy, government uncertainty in the markets. It's just introduced a whole lot of what's going to happen tomorrow attitude that investors don't like.
Mm-hmm. Well, Alberta independence is going to be, and I'm quoting you here, Tanner, it's going to be the slap of reality that the ideologically motivated people receive when when the facts actually show up. I use that all the time. Reality slapping you in the face, just like you're pulling a branch back, you're pulling that branch back, and eventually you let it go, and it lets you know that you were wrong to think it was never coming, and it's coming.
Exactly. You can only dismiss reality for so long. There comes a point when you have to, whether you like it or not, you have to face it, or it's going to face you. You know, you can only say that 2 + 2 is 6 for so long until your house tumbles because you built it improperly. Or you can only say that it's warm outside, even when it's -50, until you stand out there and you freeze to death, right? Reality there's no respecter of persons. And with this too, you know, there are a lot of people saying that this can't work or this can't work or that can't work for all of these ideological reasons. But when the rubber hits the road and, you know, the facts are brought to light, then reality will demonstrate its supremacy.
And the nice thing about reality is it drives people to prosper. You know, like Quebec. Quebec's awesome. They sit on almost unimaginable natural gas reserves. It's huge. They could be an energy superpower. They could be exporting continuously to Europe, and Europe wants the gas. Newfoundland, Labrador, same thing. They have piles of energy. Ontario has uranium. Like, there's all sorts of things there. The Atlantic provinces have energy, and they're not producing it because somebody else is producing, and they're able to reap the benefits. And I believe that it will be better for everybody when people start producing and standing on their own instead of being stifled by red tape and ideologically motivated policy that isn't beneficial to human beings. That's really where we're at.
That's basically Adam Smith. We call him the father of economics. Yeah, the idea is production's a good thing. There's an old economic law called Say's Law, which says demand comes from supply, not the vice versa. So we like production. We like producing. It's good. It's good to go out there and work and to create something valuable, because as a consequence, your life increases in its quality as well. And so does everyone else's quality of life, right? You see, that's the miracle of the market, right? Is that the famous quote is, it's not the shoemaker, right? Or the bread maker that makes, you know, everything for themselves. It's the bread maker makes bread, the shoemaker makes shoes, and the locksmith, you know, makes locks. And together, the three of them congregate and trade so that they're able to live a higher quality of life than what they otherwise could, right? The bread maker makes bread and goes to sell it so that he can provide for his family and for himself. And by doing so, he gives the shoemaker food. Great. The shoemaker does the same with his shoes. He goes forth to sell his shoes so that he can put food on his table and provide for his family. And by doing so, the bread maker has shoes to wear. Excellent. And that process repeats, basically ad infinitum. And it allows us to live with the quality of life that we do today. If we want to see a world without it, that market, you go to the Soviet Union, right? Or you go to those old communist nations that were so utopian, weren't they, in their administration of benevolence and kindness, right? Like, it's the complete opposite. When you have a central planner,
that was sarcasm, folks.
That was total sarcasm. Yeah. When you look at a central planned economy or a centrally planned economy, the results are disastrous. Always. There's too many factors in the market that cannot be divvied up and properly divided by 1, 2, or even 1,000 or 1,000,000 men, right? You instead just have to have this invisible hand moving and working to coordinate all of us.
Yeah, I'm about three quarters of the way through the Gulag Archipelago, and it's
Yeah,
that's
it's a good
unreal.
book to read.
That's a pretty
Yeah.
heavy read, but well worth it.
It's well worth it. That's one of the masterpieces for sure of the last 100 years.
Yeah, the funny thing is we have all sorts of history to look at, all sorts of literature that basically warns us about going down the path that some people want to go down, and yet it's like people just don't learn, or they don't want to learn, and we keep on moving towards that because the people that have the power want to keep the power, and the way they keep the power is by keeping us subjugated. So if we don't educate ourselves on these things, how can we break that cycle? We can't, right?
It's so important you're right, to know all this stuff. Like the Ecclesiastes says that nothing's new under the sun. So you're exactly right. Man has a tendency to repeat his mistakes over and over and over again. And you shake your head and you wonder, why on earth doesn't the society learn? But it's just the way that the society is. One of the ways we can counter that problem, however, of doing the same thing over and over and over again, making the same mistake over and over again, is, like you mentioned, like read history, right? Look at the way that the nations worked when they were set up with this governmental system or that one, because human beings aren't all that different, whether it's now or 1,000 years ago. We're pretty much basically the same.
We want the same things.
Yeah, our taste might be a little different, and our style, our fashion's a bit different, sure. Our reading comprehension is certainly different, but on the whole, right, humans are humans. And so when you study history, right, you actually acquire an ability to predict the present and the future in some sense, right? You say, this is what humans did in the past. If we continue down this road, we will do the same things that they did in the past. And so here is what the future will look like. So yeah, read Gulag Archipelago, right? Read the writings of those old classics, like, way before then, all that jazz. It's important.
And herein lies the hope, folks. It might seem bleak sometimes when you look at what's going on in the world and where people are going, where a country and a province is going, and that most people aren't paying attention. But I'll tell you something. It takes roughly 3 to 4% of a society to change the course of that society by making sacrifices, working hard, talking to people, and doing the things that need to be done. You folks that are watching these videos that I put out and that Tanner puts out and others, and educating yourselves about these things, you are that 3 to 4% of the society. And if we continue to do this and we get involved where we can change the direction of the society for the better. When the Alberta Prosperity Project started, it was, what was it, like 60, 70 people in a shop in Nisku, Tanner? I believe you were there.
I wasn't at that.
I
wasn't at that particular meeting. I came about a couple months after. But yeah, it was just 50, 60, 70 people in the shop. That's correct.
It was just small. And now the Alberta Prosperity Project is leading the way and educating Albertans as to why they need to support a referendum on independence that's going to happen next year. So don't give up hope, folks. And don't give up hope, Bonnie. I'm going to get to your question in just a moment. Actually, I'll do it right now. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't miss that part, that you guys have a heavy weight on your shoulders, in that if you know these things, you now have a moral obligation to pursue the goals that we need to pursue in order to be a flourishing society. Bonnie had a question, and it was about the pension plan, I believe. Here it is. Good question, Bonnie. Can Tanner address the massive unfunded liability of the Canada Pension Plan and how it is a doomed fund? Strong words.
Well, the unfunded liability portion of the CPP. Well, let me explain the unfunded liability, the idea of it first. So if the CPP were to stop collecting contributions right now, today, from all workers, or if workers just said, we're not going to send any money to the CPP any longer, right? The CPP would say, all right, okay, well, we have an asset pile, so we can pull from that to pay out the seniors that are still owed their CPP, right? They're still owed their pensions. But that'll run out eventually, right? If we pay out in these prodigious quantities, and if, people continue to get older, which they will, and they're still owed some money, then we're going to run out. And that's what's called the unfunded liability portion of the CPP, right? And it's quite large, right? 1.1, it's over a trillion. Was it 1.1 or 1.3, whatever it is, trillion. So a lot of money that's considered an unfunded liability. And again, economists go back and forth about whether or not this unfunded liability is normal. Like some say, yeah, it's normal, no problem at all. Other guys say, no, it's a huge problem. There's a big amount of money that isn't there if there's a large amount of money required that wouldn't be there if people stopped paying. And so, yeah, they go back and forth and debate and discuss what that ought to look like. I'm for sure more in the camp of we ought to manage the fund more properly. It ought to look a lot better than what it does now. And for me, the biggest issue is the level of payout. Like, I think it's egregious that the seniors who have paid into that fund all their lives are receiving a 2% or 2.5% return on their investment. That to me is why the fund is ultimately doomed. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, that actually is the ultimate reason, because it's a dysfunctional payout as far as the amount of money we put into that pension fund is concerned. We should be earning far better rates of return than what we actually are. If that fund or some semblance of it is going to continue. Could you imagine for a moment paying into a mutual fund or some other investment for years and years and years, and then when it came time to retire, right, you saw a return of 2.5% to 4%, most likely like 2.5%, you'd be furious, and rightfully so. Now, I know that one of the arguments is, well, again, it's a social insurance plan, and it's not meant to pay out big. It's not meant to pay out big dollars like a pension plan is supposed to pay out. But then one, call it a social insurance plan, and two, I actually don't think that excuses the dismal rates of return that you and I earn as individuals. And so, of course, when you have that sort of, well, what I'd consider a failure, it might take a few years, sure, I totally agree there, but that institution will not stand. People will eventually realize that they've been scammed, right, out of a lot of money when you look at the returns. They'll be rightfully upset about it, and something superior will have to take its place.
Well, thank goodness that Alberta is going to build that something.
Better believe it.
I'm going to throw this out there, folks. When the UCP government rolled out the idea of an Alberta Pension Plan, well, I think it was a year and a half ago or whatever, and they told us about the LifeWorks report and what the numbers were, support for an Alberta Pension Plan was only around 30%, which surprised me until I realized that the people who benefit from federalist policies put out a huge smear campaign against it. They lied about it and convinced people they needed to be fearful of it. So support was very low. But what happened, interestingly, is a group of people sacrificed their time. They showed up, they did events, and they started talking to people about it. Well, now the level of support for an Alberta pension plan is somewhere hovering in the area of 50 to 55%. So in a period of about a year, everyday, normal, ordinary people, Albertans like you and me, we run around and we talked about these things, we had conversations, and we built the support. So Alberta, if we continue doing that, we will have an Alberta pension plan. It will happen, and you're going to see the benefits across the board. So that's absolutely fantastic. There is, I did see a question about equalization. Reminded me about Quebec, because in the equalization calculations, Quebec actually doesn't include their energy revenue from hydroelectricity, which is very significant in the calculation. So Quebec they're not a have-not province. They have things, and yet they receive $12 billion, roughly $12 to $13 billion in equalization every year. So Mark says, isn't it true that if Eastern Canada produces energy, they get less equalization? If so, there's no incentive for them.
It's a good point. Well, yeah, the way equalization is calculated is by using a formula that looks at something called physical capacity. The idea is the government looks at how much each provincial, I'm oversimplifying, but it looks at how much each provincial government could raise using tax revenues under certain parameters. And so obviously provinces that make more, or at least provinces with individuals that make more, could raise more money under these certain parameters than provinces that have populations that don't make as much. And so, yes, if you are an Eastern nation and you begin to produce energy, harvest energy, and so on, the average wage or income of your province will increase, thereby increasing your physical capacity. And if your physical capacity reaches a certain threshold, then you will no longer receive equalization payments. So there's a balance there between incentives. You're right. If they produce too much, they earn too much, and therefore they don't receive equalization. Whereas if they don't produce, right, and leave, let's say, that oil or whatever other resource it is locked in the ground, then they will receive equalization, because on the whole, their people will be kept poorer. And Chris is right? Quebec is an outlier where they don't take their hydroelectricity into account when looking at equalization. And so they receive a lot, by far the most amount of money compared to any other province in Canada.
Yep. And Ontario also receives equalization, even though Ontario is touted as having the highest GDP and strongest economy in Canada, yet they also receive equalization dollars. But, that really doesn't surprise me, because we've had a prime minister say it out loud, screw the West, will take the rest. We had Clifford Sifton saying that the great trade of the prairies would be used to build up the factories in the East and enrich people's lives. Time after time after time again, the cat has been let out of the bag. There's a lot of cats been let out of a lot of bags, and that this is what was intended. It was intended right from the beginning that the wealth of the West would be used to prop up and contribute to the lifestyle of the East. And I say that time needs to come to an end, and it needs to come to an end in 2026 with a successful referendum on Alberta independence.
Wholeheartedly agree. What more could be said, hey?
Yeah. And then, you know what? As an independent Alberta, maybe Prince Edward Island needs a hand doing something. Why wouldn't we help them? I mean, Alberta isn't, we're amicable with the other provinces. We love Canadians. We just don't like the structure. Doesn't mean that we can't help our neighbors in the future. It just means that we're tired of being forced to support things that are not, we're forced to support policy that hurts us. And it's just not right.
No, it's intolerable. You're exactly right. We're forced to support a policy that tries to encourage our abolition. And that seems to be madness to support that, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of madness on X. My good grief. What an exciting time that was. I seriously, sometimes I just go and I read through the comments just for entertainment. But at the very least, like I said earlier, people are paying attention. They're perhaps genuinely interested in this. They might have an emotional opposition to one of these things right now, but at least the seed is planted and they can ponder on it. And who knows, maybe they'll come over to the side of freedom and prosperity where the rest of us have landed. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Otherwise, we'll just become independent and drag them along in prosperity anyway. So either way, they'll win.
It's true. The more the merrier. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I see the questions, there's a lot of comments, a lot of thank yous. People are very happy that you're here, Tanner, as am I. Much appreciated. And we're, what are we, an hour and 20 minutes now? I think that's pretty decent for a Tuesday night.
Solid.
So unless you have anything else, I would like to mention that in addition to a young economist, you are also an author.
True.
You are a lay pastor. You've delivered services at the Whistle Stop Cafe, at our Chris and Carrie show, Bibles and Bulls. Both were absolutely fantastic. You've written 3 books now.
3 books. You're right. 3 books.
3 books. So True Christianity, this one here.
Yeah.
And Kingdom of Cain.
Yes.
Which I can't find as well. And Antichrist 2030.
Yes, that's the
Where
newest
do people
one.
find that stuff?
Well, right now it's on Amazon. If I speak in person, I bring them. And then on my website, just tannerhnidey.com. Anyone can send me a little message if they'd like. And I have books there.
I'll give you a little teaser about Antichrist 2030. The premise of that book is that we have this idea that when evil shows up, it's going to be obvious. It's going to be horns and blowing smoke out its nostrils. But the reality is it's the opposite. When evil shows up, when bad things come, it comes in the form of things that we are attracted to, things that we like, maybe even bringing peace where there wasn't peace before. And the only way that we can call that out and identify it and know what the proper path is if we educate ourselves. Just like in politics, we need to educate ourselves on civics. With stuff like the pension plan, we need to educate ourselves on the economy. When it comes to things like evil, we need to educate ourselves on scripture. That is the only instruction manual that will prepare us for the evil that will inevitably come to this world. Is that kind of, did I get it right? I've only read about a quarter of the book.
No, that's not too bad. That's pretty, scripture's it. That is the book. Absolutely. If Jesus used it to counter Satan in the wilderness, it's good enough for us.
Where did you get that idea? What prompted you to write that book?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, it's a good question. You know, you speak at a lot of events, and everyone would talk about how they're looking for a political savior, and that always rang alarm bells, right? Because you look at history, like we talked about, and when you do that, you see that people who put their faith in a political savior tend to be very broken by the end of the entire ordeal. So that might have been the foundation of it. But then just scripture itself. Yeah, reading the particular books are Daniel, obviously Revelation, end of Matthew is a big one, Isaiah. Lots of those books have a lot to do with it, and it seemed to be a very pertinent topic for the time, considering how everyone right now is on a hyper alert, right? We know what our governments are trying to do. We know what they want to do. And so I thought, what better time to write a book about Antichrist? The 2030, that's just an eye-catching number. That's all. Because, of course, we all know Agenda 2030. So that's why I put it there. Anyways, but it was a lot of fun to write. And the reception's been very positive, very encouraging. So on to the next one. It's been great.
No, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to it. One of the things that I've picked up on when speaking at events, kind of same as you, people are very concerned about some things that they see happening. Digital currency, digital ID are two of them. Yeah. You know, digital currency and digital ID are both required to implement end times prophecy, mark of the beast type stuff, where you can't buy or sell without participating in that system. And people are like, well, how do we stop this? What do we do? And I of course, I give the political thing. Oh, we need to be the 3%, change the course of society, have a constitution in Alberta that prevents it, all those things, right? But the reality is, if you are a man of faith or a woman of faith and you believe what's in the scriptures, that is coming. And you aren't going to stop it. You are going to have to live through it. And if that's the case, it becomes absolutely critical to arm yourself with the knowledge you need to go through that. And the knowledge you need is not in civics or politics. It's in scripture. And the Savior isn't a policymaker or a politician. It's Jesus Christ, plain and simple. And I've been actually saying that at Alberta Prosperity Project events, because that's a truth that a lot of people don't want to admit. They want to say, oh, we can just stop this if we do these things. But the reality is we may not. And there is another part of it that people need to think about.
Christ is the answer. Pretty solid. You might become a preacher.
Well, I don't know about that. We'll see. All right. Well, I think that's pretty much a wrap, Tanner, unless you have anything else. People know where to find you now, your website, Amazon books. I would encourage you folks to pick up one of his books and read it. They're fantastic. I certainly recommend Antichrist 2030. I've found it captivating, and very few books captivate me. So that's a good place to start.
It's a high compliment. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Can people look forward to seeing you at any events or anything in the future? Would you have anything going on that you want to talk about?
I sure hope so.
In January.
We'll see what the new year brings. Who knows? Usually the way it works is a group or whoever gives me a call, if I'm free to speak, I'm up there. So I'll let them know.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks again. If I don't see you before the new year, which is very likely, have a wonderful new year. Wish your lovely wife a merry new year for me.
I will.
And looking forward to our next meeting.
You bet. I appreciate it. Happy New Year.
Thanks. Night, Tanner. Well, there you go. Fantastic, as always. We've had Tanner on the Chris and Carey show a few times. It's always really good. The guy, I'm not sure how he fits the giant brain he has in that head of his, but the insights he has for being a man much younger than me, he's really wise, and it would behoove you, if that's a word, to pay attention to his writing. Read the stuff he puts on his Substack and his webpage. He's got an email distribution list where he writes and he sends stuff out. It's always great. Highly recommended. 10 out of 10. Now, I'm going to read you a part of a piece, an excerpt of that blog that I wrote. And I would be appreciative if you would go to my website, whistlestoptruckstop.ca, and read the entire blog. It might give you some insight as to what we're talking about. So here we go. Alberta's economy is heavily goods producing and export oriented. Goods producing industries account for approximately 43 to 44% of provincial GDP, with energy and energy linked industries driving exports, capital investment, and federal tax generation. Alberta's output is globally priced, trade exposed, and capable of generating foreign exchange. While energy markets are cyclical, Alberta's core industries produce tradable goods that sell into global markets and generate external revenues. Ontario's economy, by contrast, is predominantly service-based, with services accounting for roughly 77 to 78% of provincial GDP. Major components include real estate, rental and leasing, construction, finance and insurance, and professional and administrative services. Approximately 30% of Ontario's GDP is directly or indirectly tied to housing activity, construction, and housing-linked finance. This creates a concentration risk comparable in scale to Alberta's exposure to energy markets. The nature of that risk, however, is different. Ontario's housing finance complex is domestically leveraged and highly dependent on interest rates, credit expansion, immigration policy, and government backstops. It is not exportable, and it is not globally priced. A sustained housing downturn could plausibly reduce Ontario's GDP by 4 to 6% over an economic cycle, with spillover effects into construction, banking, consumer spending, and government revenues. For more, please visit whistlestoptruckstop.ca. Scroll down to the blog section. You can read the entire thing. There's other blogs on there on Alberta independence, why time matters and you shouldn't take it for granted. Some stuff about cooking even. I hope you find it interesting. And if you don't find it interesting, I don't know what to say. I was going to say at least find it handy, but really, what are you going to use pixels on a screen for if you don't find them interesting? Thanks again, folks. Have a great night. Thanks for all the questions and participation. And we will see you, I believe, we're going to try this again on Thursday with my friend David Parker, talking about civics, how to get involved, why we need to get involved, and how we can change the world. If anybody knows how to change the world, it's David, because he sure helped us change Alberta, didn't he? Night, folks.
Meow.
Alberta may not be the biggest part of the Canadian economy, but it sure as hell drives it.